I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other's stories, where the rhythm of life was measured by church bells, school buses, and the smells of home-cooked meals drifting down the streets. My mother always told me, "Child, don't let anyone dim your light. Your heart is precious, and only someone willing to nurture it deserves a place in it." I carried her words like a talisman, though I didn't understand their weight until much later. As a young woman, I was vibrant, full of dreams, and naive in ways that make heartbreak inevitable. I had learned to be independent from necessity, but love still fascinated me. It promised connection, warmth, and a future painted in colors I hadn't yet seen. I had friends who joked about my tendency to trust too easily, but I saw it as optimism. To me, believing in people was a virtue, not a weakness. Then I met him. He wasn't flashy, but there was a quiet confidence about him that drew me in. The kind of presence that made you feel noticed without being overwhelmed. He listened when I spoke. He remembered details I had casually mentioned days or weeks ago. He smiled at me in a way that suggested he saw more than my outward self. He made me feel chosen. I mistook steadiness for emotional depth, restraint for love. I mistook charm for care. We began dating slowly, naturally. There was laughter, long walks, and conversations that stretched into the night. I shared stories about my childhood, my fears, my ambitions. He shared his, carefully selected, measured, as if he knew the power of each revelation. We had similar dreams, or so I believed. Marriage felt inevitable, though I never admitted it aloud. I was young, but I already knew what it felt like to be alone, and I thought I had finally found someone who could fill the spaces in me I hadn't understood until then. Our wedding was intimate, a small gathering of family and close friends. I wore white, he wore black, and everyone said how natural we looked together. I remember the way he whispered my new last name in my ear, and the warmth that spread through me, a feeling I believed would last forever. For a time it did. The first years were easy in a way that made me feel secure. We settled into routines. He worked diligently. I managed our home. We traveled, sometimes with friends, sometimes just the two of us. There were moments that felt magical, late-night drives with the city lights blurring past, cooking dinner together, sitting in silence while reading on the couch. I thought those silences meant peace, that comfort could exist without constant conversation. But, as it often does, the first cracks began subtly. He began staying late at work more often. Calls came at odd hours, but he brushed them off as work-related. I noticed him becoming distracted when I spoke, nodding absently, not quite hearing me. I told myself I was imagining things, that patience was part of love, that adulthood required compromise. I learned to adjust. I stopped asking questions that might upset him. I silenced my complaints. I swallowed my feelings because I loved him, or so I told myself. Each small concession seemed harmless until it became a pattern, and patterns build invisible walls around you, without your noticing. There were nights I cried silently in the shower, nights I lay awake listening to his even breathing, wondering why I felt so alone while lying next to him. I questioned myself constantly. Was I too sensitive? Was I overreacting? Was love supposed to feel like this quiet suffocation? The years passed. We built a life together, friends, events, responsibilities, but I began to feel like a guest in my own home. He had become a man who looked at me every day but no longer truly saw me. And still I stayed. I stayed because leaving felt like admitting failure. Because walking away from someone you loved deeply felt like abandoning a part of yourself. Because I believed in the vow I had made, though I realized slowly it bound me to a life that no longer fit me. Then came the discovery. I never expected it. I didn't look for evidence, didn't snoop. It found me in a moment of quiet curiosity, a glance at a phone left on the table. Messages. Photos. Lies stacked carefully like bricks in a wall I never knew was being built around me. A second life he had been leading while I smiled at him every morning, believing he was mine in every way that mattered. I remember the hollow sensation in my chest, the shaking of my hands, the dizziness that made me sit down before I fell. I felt betrayed, Yes, but also foolish. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind? The anger came after the shock, hot and consuming. And then the sadness, quiet and deep, like a river settling into the canyon of my heart. When I confronted him, I expected defensiveness, denial, perhaps even tears. But he didn't beg. He didn't fight. He looked almost relieved, as if being found out freed him from pretending any longer. That relief cut deeper than the betrayal itself. He told me he hadn't meant to hurt me, that it wasn't personal, that it just happened. Those words told me everything I needed to know. My pain was irrelevant. My heartbreak was secondary. His comfort mattered more than my truth. I packed my things quietly, without drama. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, only the heavy weight of realization. I left the home we had built together, a home that now felt like a cage. Each step away felt like shedding a layer of myself I had hidden to survive in a marriage that no longer recognized me. The months after the divorce were some of the hardest of my life. Healing isn't neat. It isn't linear. Some days I felt liberated and strong. Other days, I wept with no clear reason, missing not just the man but the idea of us, the future that would never exist. I questioned myself constantly. Did I love wrong? Did I trust too much? Could I have saved us if I had acted differently? Slowly, I rebuilt. I learned how to enjoy my own company, how to sit in silence without feeling lonely, how to trust my instincts again. I learned to decorate my space for myself, cook meals I loved, and laugh without self-consciousness. I learned to let go of the idea that my worth was tied to someone else's recognition of it. Years passed. I found joy in small things. I learned that peace could exist without constant compromise. I learned that love without self-erasure is rare, but it exists within oneself. I told myself I was healed. And then the call came. The first weeks after leaving him were disorienting. I had a new apartment, a new space that belonged solely to me, yet I felt strangely adrift. The walls were empty, the silence thick. It should have felt liberating, but at first it only felt lonely. I would wake in the mornings and forget, for a split second, that he wasn't there. And then the memories would rush back, like a tidal wave I had no strength to fight. I had to learn how to breathe in my own home, to exist without explaining myself to anyone. I had to relearn who I was. For years, I had shaped myself around him, the quiet version of me, the compliant version, the version that adjusted so carefully to his moods that I almost forgot what I liked, what I wanted, who I truly was. Now, I had to find her again. I started small. I bought candles that smelled like freedom, flowers that reminded me of spring mornings I used to dream about. I hung up pictures that made me smile, not because he would approve, but because they spoke to me. I bought a journal and wrote endlessly, scribbling down thoughts I had kept locked up for years. Each word felt like a small exhale, a reclamation of myself. Friends rallied around me, though I resisted at first. I didn't want their pity, their judgment, their well-meaning advice. I wanted silence. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts, to navigate the rawness without interference. But slowly, their presence became a balm. We cooked meals together, went for long walks, shared coffee in quiet cafes where no one knew our history. Each shared laugh, each small gesture of support, helped me remember that life could still hold beauty. Work became a sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, deadlines, and presentations. I was recognized for my diligence and creativity. The compliments felt strange at first. I had not expected anyone to notice my efforts, only his approval. But gradually, I allowed myself to enjoy them. I began to feel capable again. Not just in theory, but in the lived reality of my days. Yet healing is never linear. Some nights, I would lie in bed and feel the emptiness creeping back in. Memories would surface, the way he used to hold me, the laughter we shared, the promises that had felt eternal. I would wonder if I had loved too deeply, or if I had expected too much. I would feel the sting of betrayal, raw as ever, and sometimes I would cry silently, clutching my pillow as if it were the only thing that understood. I remember the night I realized I had changed. I was walking home from the bookstore, holding a bag of novels I had chosen just for myself. The air was crisp, the city lights blurred in the mist. I felt an unexpected sense of calm, an inner certainty that I hadn't known for years. I thought about him, about the life I had left behind, and I realized I no longer longed for it. I did not miss his presence the way I once had. The pain still existed, but it no longer defined me. I had reclaimed myself. It was during this period that I began to reconnect with hobbies I had abandoned. I took a painting class at a small community center, laughing with strangers over spilled paints and shared frustration. I joined a book club, discussing stories not only for pleasure, but for insight into human experiences I had long avoided. I started journaling more intentionally, not merely recording events, but reflecting on my emotions, examining patterns, understanding triggers. Each activity reminded me that life could be rich and meaningful outside of the shadow of betrayal. One afternoon, I met a woman named Simone at the local cafe. She had a warm presence and a sharp wit that reminded me of myself when I was younger. We struck up conversations about literature, life, and the subtle ways people can betray those they love. Simone became a mirror, reflecting back to me the resilience I had forgotten I possessed. With her, I realized that friendship could be as restorative as love. The late nights, the whispered promises, the empty silences, the betrayal I had discovered like a sudden, cruel storm. "I forgive you," I said quietly, the words flowing more from my own strength than from anything he could have earned. But forgiveness doesn't mean returning. It doesn't mean reopening what was closed. He looked surprised, almost pained, as if he had expected something different. Perhaps he thought the apology would heal everything, that it would undo the years of absence, the nights of doubt, the rebuilding I had done without him. "I know," he said softly. I wanted you to know that I understand now, that I see what I did, and I'm truly sorry. I see it now, too late." The words hit me harder than any anger could have. Too late. That phrase carried the weight of every night I had cried, every moment I had doubted myself, every step I had taken to rebuild my life. He had finally realized, but I had already moved forward. We spoke for a while, carefully navigating the conversation. He asked about my life, my work, my happiness. I answered honestly, guardedly. I didn't speak of the nights I had cried, the struggles I had endured, the private victories that had brought me back to myself. Those were mine alone. He apologized again, and I accepted it again. But each acceptance was a quiet reminder. The damage had been done. My life had moved on. I had learned to live fully without him. His remorse, sincere as it seemed, could not change the past. I remembered the first time I discovered his betrayal. The messages, the lies, the sense of disbelief that had settled like a stone in my chest. The confrontation, his almost relieved expression, the quiet end to our marriage. Every detail came back as vividly as the day it happened. I realized then that forgiveness was not about him. It was about me, reclaiming my life and refusing to carry his guilt as my own burden. He reached across the table at one point, a tentative gesture, as if seeking permission to touch the past. I did not flinch, but I did not take his hand. My boundaries were no longer negotiable. I wanted another chance, he admitted quietly. I know it's asking too much, but I had to say it. I looked at him steadily. My life, the person I had become, the peace I had cultivated, all of it was my own. I realized that his request was not for love, but for redemption, for relief from the burden of his own conscience. And I understood then that his return was never about me. It was about him trying to make sense of the years he had lost. "I'm glad you came to apologize," I said finally. "I'm glad you see the truth now. But there is no second chance here. There is only the life I've built without you. And I've learned to protect it." He nodded, a mixture of regret and understanding crossing his face. There was sadness in his eyes, but I did not feel the urge to comfort him. I had comforted him once, at the cost of my own peace. I would not do it again. After we parted, I walked home slowly, each step feeling heavier with the weight of memory and lighter with the certainty of self-possession. The encounter had stirred old pain, yes, but it also affirmed my growth. I realized I could face the person who had hurt me most and remain whole, unchanged in my commitment to myself. Flashbacks accompanied my walk. I saw the small betrayals in vivid detail, the subtle dismissals, the phone calls at odd hours, the nights he had spent away without explanation. I remembered my tears, my doubts, the quiet despair that had once occupied my evenings. And I acknowledged each moment, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Each memory was a testimony to the woman I had become, resilient, aware, and self-sufficient. Later that evening, I sat by the window, coffee in hand, the city lights shimmering below. I reflected on the years since our separation. The pain had been necessary. The growth had been inevitable. And I finally understood that closure does not come from another person. It comes from oneself. I forgave him fully, privately, and then released him entirely. I would carry no resentment, no longing, no desire to revisit the past. The damage was done, yes, but my life was mine to continue. Healing, I realized, was not about erasing pain. It was about integrating it into a life that still had room for joy, love, and peace. My heart had been broken, but it had also learned to beat stronger, more resilient, more aware of its own worth. Some apologies come too late. Some people return not to reconcile, but to remind us of our own strength. And some wounds, while they leave scars, also leave lessons that are priceless. I learned to say no, to set boundaries, to honor my own experiences and emotions above anyone else's. I had survived betrayal. I had rebuilt myself. And I had come to understand that self-respect is the greatest form of revenge. He apologized, yes. And I accepted it, but it was not enough to bring the past back. Not enough to erase the years I had spent grieving, learning, and loving myself anew. The apology was a bridge I no longer needed. I closed that chapter fully, carrying not anger, but clarity. Not bitterness, but peace. And in that peace, I discovered the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who had survived heartbreak and thrived beyond it. After that meeting, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but I noticed subtle shifts in myself. The encounter had been necessary, not for reconciliation, not for validation, but as a final confirmation of what I had known for years. I was whole on my own. My peace was not dependent on him. My joy was not contingent upon his recognition. My life was mine, and I intended to live it fully. I began noticing things I had overlooked before. Mornings felt brighter, though not because of sunlight alone, but because I could greet them freely, without the shadow of past betrayal looming over me. The laughter of children on the street, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, the soft hum of the city, all of it reminded me that life still held simple joys. I reveled in the small pleasures, the moments that once seemed trivial but now felt profound. I strengthened my routines, my rituals that were once small acts of self-care but had grown into symbols of resilience. Morning coffee by the window became meditation, journaling became reflection, walks became ceremonies of freedom. Each action was a reminder that my life was no longer defined by someone else's choices, but by my own agency. Friendships deepened. Simone remained a constant, her presence both comforting and grounding. We laughed more than we ever had before. She listened when I needed to speak, and she challenged me when I needed truth. Other friendships flourished as well, unburdened by old obligations or emotional debts. I allowed myself to invest in people who reciprocated care, who celebrated my growth without judgment, who understood that life after betrayal required patience, compassion, and honest connection. I also learned to embrace solitude without fear. Loneliness had once been a shadow, a reminder of what I lacked. Now it became a space for introspection, creativity, and self-discovery. I painted, wrote, read, traveled, and explored aspects of myself I had ignored for years. The independence that once felt like isolation now felt like empowerment. The thought of him occasionally crossed my mind, but it no longer caused pain. I thought about the apology, the meeting, the tentative hope in his eyes, and I recognized that his journey was his own. My healing was mine. His remorse could not alter the path I had forged, nor should it. And I felt a quiet compassion for the man he had been, even as I remained firm in the knowledge that my life had moved beyond him. I found love again, not as a replacement, not as a remedy for old wounds, but as a celebration of who I had become. It was gentle, steady, and reciprocal. I was no longer the woman who feared abandonment or clung to approval. I was confident, self-assured, and capable of loving without losing myself. Each relationship thereafter was built on trust, mutual respect, and the understanding that love does not require sacrifice of the soul. One evening, sitting on my balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reflected on the years that had passed. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the silence, the tears, the rebuilding. All of it had shaped me. And yet, I realized that I had not merely survived. I had grown, evolved, and discovered a strength I did not know existed within me. I thought about the phrase, "He apologized when the damage was already done." And I understood its truth. Apologies, though meaningful, cannot undo the past. They cannot erase the nights of crying, the moments of doubt, the loss of innocence, the lessons learned in solitude. They arrive as recognition, often too late, and sometimes serve only to illuminate the journey already taken. And yet, there is beauty in that recognition. There is closure in knowing that one has grown beyond the reach of past pain. There is empowerment in realizing that the person you once depended on for validation is no longer central to your sense of worth. Forgiveness is not about them. It is about reclaiming your life, your energy, your heart. I carried this understanding forward into every interaction, every decision, every new chapter. I no longer hesitated to assert my boundaries, to demand respect, to honor my own needs. I had learned that strength is quiet, persistent, and unyielding. It is not loud or dramatic, but it is unshakable. Occasionally, I imagined telling him what I had discovered, what I had become, but I realized there was no need. My life was testimony enough. My peace, my joy, my fulfillment, all of it was a living narrative that required no witness other than myself. As the years continued, I embraced the fullness of my life. Work, friendships, love, travel, creative pursuits, all blended into a tapestry of experiences that reflected my choices, my agency, my resilience. I understood that life is not defined by the people who leave or hurt us, but by the way we respond, recover, and reclaim our narrative. The woman I had been, naive, trusting, broken, had transformed into someone grounded, self-aware, and empowered. The lessons were hard-won, but they were mine. I understood now that the damage done had also been a teacher. It had forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, my fears, and my capacity for growth. I had learned to hold space for my own emotions, to honor my own healing, and to walk away from anything that threatened my peace. I had discovered that true resilience is not measured by the absence of pain, but by the courage to continue, to flourish, and to embrace life fully despite it. And so I lived, not in spite of the damage, but because of it. I walked with confidence, loved with clarity, and embraced each day with gratitude for the strength I had found. The apology had come too late, but its timing was irrelevant. What mattered was the life I had built, the person I had become, and the peace that no one could take from me. The damage had been done, yes. But in the aftermath, I discovered the power of healing, the depth of resilience, and the unshakable truth that my worth was mine alone. I had survived, grown, and thrived, and no apology, no matter how heartfelt, could ever diminish that truth. I understood finally that some lessons cannot be learned without pain. Some strength cannot be forged without trials, and some closure can only come from within. As I sat watching the last light fade from the sky, I smiled, not because the past had been erased, but because I had been reborn. The woman who once waited for someone else's apology no longer existed. In her place was a woman who knew her value, cherished her peace, and embraced the life she had fought to reclaim. And in that quiet, unassuming strength, I found the truest form of empowerment, the knowledge that I am enough, that I am whole, and that I can face the world on my own terms. He had apologized, yes, but the damage had already been done, and I had turned that damage into my greatest triumph.